Well above deck, under a black heaven, moonless and distraught, I put my arm about my son's waist and held him fast. "You've won, my boy," the captain said. "Your grandmother's soul is going to where it belongs." "Let me see it," my son said. "You can't see it," the blue-shirted man said. "It has no visibility." "Nor weight, nor color, nor odor," the captain added. "It has nothing of the qualities you expect in your world." "How will I know you've freed her soul then?" my boy asked. "How will I know you've kept your word?" "Stand very still," the captain ordered, and you, pointing to me, you right beside him. "Notice that there's no wind, no breeze, no movement of air, that there's only stillness in the flat screen of night." "Yes," I said, "there's not the faintest stir." "Now hold your breath, the two of you." We stayed very still, not breathing, and suddenly felt, for the quickest of seconds, a feathery whisper brush our face. "That's that, then," the captain said. "That's what?" I asked, annoyed by his mumbo-jumbo, but what I thought were his theatrical airs. "Her last breath just flew by you," he said. "Her last breath carrying her soul." At his final words, we found ourselves, my boy and I, returned to our house. The ship had vanished, leaving it where it had once been, a black line of the sea. I carried my sleepy boy to his bed and left his sleeping self to digest the night. I went to my room thinking I would read and reflect on the night's strange and wonderful events. And then at early morning, I would start my mother's procession from my wife's same route, from house to funeral parlor, and from there to the grave. I always kept a stack of books at the night table, books I chose randomly, and whose pages I read in no order and in small bites. For this reason, I read very little fiction, enjoying poetry and aphoristic writings by artists especially. It was to Ingres I turned that night, thinking to find a sweet passage to ease me from images of death and pirated souls. "A true line," it read, "is closer to God than any church." It was a noble thought, designed to assure artists of their value, or to make them feel inadequate and forever striving. I repeated the sentence a few times, then shut my eyes for the next few hours before daylight. Somehow the artist's words made me even more melancholy than the fantastic events on the pirate ship, more sad than my mother's death, which already had seemed so long ago, before there were ever mothers. These words made me wonder why I ever wanted to be an artist, why I ever wanted to live, though I never thought I wanted to die. I tried very hard to quiet myself, to calm my thoughts, but I could not. I wondered how my son was faring after such a powerful night, so I went down to his room, but he was not in his bed, which was perfectly made, as if the housekeeper had trimmed the sheets and flattened out the blankets. I went from room to room, went up to the attic and down to the basement, searching and searching for my boy. I went to my mother's room, but he was not there. Either, or oddly enough, was she. I would think about her later. For the moment, however, I was not concerned about the mother, knowing that whatever happened to her body mattered very little now that her soul was on its own adventures. I had not yet started to grieve her death, so busy was I in the events of the night, but I knew I had an eternity to grieve. I went out to my studio, sure that my son had gone there, where he had often come with his mother to visit me at my work, where he felt safe among the stacks of drawings and tubes of paint, safe in the place where, for all my regrets of not being the artist I had dreamed of being, I had been most happy. He liked my happiness, my boy, as had his mother. It made them both feel safe when nothing much else was safe. Imagine, I started to say, imagine that my mother had so little control over her life as to have her husband die on the phone in mid-sentence. And imagine how she had so little say over things that she herself had died in mid-read, so to speak. So little control over our life, and none in death and its aftermath. No voice to say where your soul went, if it went anywhere at all. Granted, it had not been plucked from your last breath and stowed aboard a pirate ship for trading. "Don't give it a thought," my mother answered once when I was a boy. I asked where we went when we died. I did not give it a thought for a long time. having erased the question from my view until after my wife died. But soon after, I wondered whether the dead ever missed the living, whether they entered a new world where nothing of the past lived and where no one who had lived mattered any longer. My mother dreamed of an eternity spent in a library where she could read all the books in the world in all their languages. How many millions of books there would be, Mom, I said, awed by such a vast project. Yes, she said, but one day, just another day in eternity, she would have read every book ever written. And then where would she be? The studio, except for the feeling of stale dust and emptiness, was much as I had left it, except that the paintings looked tired, sagging on their stretchers. Paintings need to be seen, or they languish, wither, and they die. My unfinished Poussin was leaning, languishing, against a windowless wall, though I was sure I had left it on the easel when I went out to visit the ship at anchor. I would have loved to have finished that canvas, and this time I hoped I would have the courage to paint my wife's face where the shepherdess's was supposed to be, the courage to leave, for however long it lasted, a trace of my heart. My son was not in the studio, even though the morning sunlight was flooding the large, sad room. What I mean is that although it was light, he had still not appeared. Whatever that meant, I was worried now because I missed him so much, and I was frightened of a life where I'd always miss him. I'll miss you too, I said guiltily to my wife, in case she had read my thoughts from somewhere in the universe. And I'll miss you as well, I said to my mother, not wanting to feel unloved. But of course, missing a son is different from missing all others who return to you in various guises. But unlike the swallows, sons do not return in the spring. In the middle of my musings, the door opened, and my son came in with a beautiful young woman. He was tall now, with a faint red mustache, and he walked with a seaman's gait, as if to steady himself against the rolling deck of the world. He had his arm about the beautiful woman's waist. She was full of smiles for him, and he held her like a man confident that he is loved. I was happy for him, and wished my mother could see him now, a young man in love. Dad, he sighed with a low sigh of evocation, memory, and longing. Then he slowly looked about the studio, even above, at the beams under the high open ceiling, looked about as if searching for me and our old life there. But I was nowhere to be found. Thank you. Thank you very much. Wow. The cigarettes and bonbons are free on the house afterward. So if there's anything you want to ask me or have Christina to ask me, or I'd be very happy to lie to you.
Hi, Fred.
Hi, Arthur.
What prompted you to write
Arthur
this?
Necessi, a wonderful writer. Very wonderful writer.
What prompted you to write this piece?
Well, it was soon to be my godson's 7th birthday, and since I'd given him all the material things I could afford by that time, including a telescope, I didn't know what to do for him anymore. And I really thought, I mean, that sounds very intellectual because you don't start stories that way, but I really thought I want to give him something that when he gets older he might care about and would mean something to him. And I don't know how the story itself started. They usually start by an image of some kind, or you know how it works. Some line in your brain or something like that, and then it just moves. But I guess in my heart I wanted to make him a hero. I wanted to make him, because he loves to draw. He's going to be, what was he going to be? He's going to be an artist or a writer. But now he's a writer. He's now 12. He's a writer. But I don't know. I guess that was the birthday thing. I think that was the beginning of it. Yeah, an occasional poem for like an occasional story for an occasion. Don't be bashful. You've had enough. Okay, Bob. Yeah.
Specific in your mind, using Pilgrim's Progress, which of course then begins to conjure all kinds of ideas about journeys and where the soul goes.
Sure, that's exactly right.
And of course, Poussin's great painting with that mysterious,
wonderful painting.
logo. Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they tied together. Pilgrim's Progress. This is Bob Lasada, and I mentioned him because this is this intimate group tonight in this rainstorm. Bob and I were City College students in the 50s, and Bob was then and still is a poet, and we were sort of part of the gang of intellectual artists at the college. Maybe there were 8 of us, and we stuck together very strongly. I have to say, I'm sorry to bring that up, Bob, but it's been so long. I saw him once in the last, since the 59. A couple of times, right. Pilgrim's Progress, obviously, is the journey, kind of everyman journey to find his way in the world. And I also thought it was a kind of joke, because I remember reading it and hating it. I thought it was the most boring book on the planet. But I didn't think about the Magic Mountain that way. It was a kind of joke. And the Tintin, of course, I love to put in because because I wrote a novel about Tintin in a New World. And then the Poussin is because I came to him very late in life. I hated Poussin. I mean, to me, the worst thing on the planet was to go to see a Poussin painting, especially at the Metropolitan, where they have the worst of all the Poussin paintings in the world. They just managed to have the worst ones. You know, really, if you think about it, go there and see them, and you'll think, you never want to see a Poussin. Why would you ever want to see it? They're the most pathetic paintings you've ever seen. So I think it's, when I looked at some of the reproductions, I might have seen something in London. I might have seen one of those, or in Madrid. They have wonderful, the Spanish have fantastic Poussins at the Prado. And I couldn't believe how beautiful they were. I mean, everything I hated in art, narrative painting, allegory, and stuff like that, all of a sudden seemed so fresh and beautiful. And that painting, of course, is almost a cliche, you know, for even in the most beautiful places in the planet, in Arcadia, death is there. Death is always there. So I guess, you know, these are not conscious things, you know, because you're a writer, and, you know, you don't sit there and say, now I think I'll put in a Poussin painting here because it's a good image. But it doesn't, you know. But the Pilgrim's Progress, I definitely had on purpose, because I really, you know. That and the Bible, as you probably know, were the most famous books of the 17th century, 18th century. The Bible and Pilgrim's Progress. Maybe we should all buy a copy and see if we like it. We'll run at the Strand, big run on Pilgrim's Progress. No, what happened, why it happened.
Well, large stretches of the prose is very beautiful.
The beautiful writing. No, I agree. I'm just making mischief.
Yeah.